If you still have a Pentax DSLR sitting in your bag, maybe it is a K5, a K3, or one of the cameras you trusted when the weather turned bad and the job still had to get done. The strange thing is, many of the lenses built for those cameras are now easier to ignore than ever. Mirrorless changed the conversation, and Pentax DSLR glass became unfashionable almost overnight. But some of these lenses still offer more character, more durability, and more real-world value than people give them credit for. You are watching AltBuzz Lenses. Subscribe for classic glass, forgotten systems, and the lenses photographers still talk about. At number 5, we have the SMC Pentax-DA 17 to 70mm f4 AL SDM. There is a kind of lens that never gets talked about at camera shows or in collector circles. It does not have a legendary reputation or a cult following. It just works. Day after day, shoot after shoot, condition after condition. The 17 to 70mm f4 was exactly that lens for a generation of Pentax shooters who wanted their camera ready before the moment happened, not after. This was the lens you mounted on a K5 before a weekend trip and never took off. Travel days, family gatherings, street walks, quiet landscapes where the light was doing something worth capturing, this zoom handled all of it without asking you to think too hard about which lens to reach for. It covered a genuinely useful range on an APS-C sensor, giving you something close to a wide angle on one end and a comfortable short telephoto on the other. The versatility was not accidental. Pentax built this lens for photographers who wanted a single dependable option, not a bag full of alternatives. What made it matter within a Pentax kit was not just the range, it was what the lens represented about the system itself. Pentax was not only about the precious limited primes or the serious DA Star glass. It also made tools for people who needed a camera that was simply ready. The 17 to 70 was that tool. Honest, capable, and completely unpretentious about what it was built to do. If you are looking at used copies today, check the autofocus carefully. The SDM motor in older examples can show wear, and this is not a lens you want to discover has an autofocus problem after you have already committed to it. The aperture sits at f4 rather than f2.8, and that is a real limitation in low light. But for the photographer who valued reliability and range over speed, it remains a lens worth considering. But practical is not the same as forgettable. The next lens is where Pentax started feeling more personal than the big camera brands. At number 4, we have the ED Pentax-DA 35mm f2.8 Macro Limited. There is something different about picking up a small, metal-bodied lens and feeling immediately that whoever made it was thinking carefully about the experience of using it. Not the specification sheet, not the marketing, the actual feeling of having it in your hand, mounted on your camera, ready to go somewhere. The ED Pentax-DA 35mm Macro Limited was one of those lenses. Compact, precise, and quietly distinctive in a way that larger systems rarely managed. On an APS-C sensor, a 35mm prime gives you a field of view close to what your eyes actually see. It is the kind of focal length that disappears into your shooting, rather than announcing itself. What made this particular lens unusual was the macro capability sitting alongside that everyday usefulness. You could spend a morning photographing a city street, and then stop to document the texture of an old wall or the detail of a flower, without reaching for a different lens. That combination of ordinary and close was not a novelty. It was genuinely practical, and Pentax understood that the photographers most likely to buy this lens were the kind who noticed details that other people walked past. The build quality told the same story. Metal construction, careful finishing, the kind of tactile confidence that made you want to take it somewhere rather than leave it on a shelf. It made a Pentax DSLR feel intentional in a way that many bigger systems never quite managed. The limitation is honest and worth stating clearly. This is not a fast prime built for low light or action. It is not going to track a subject moving quickly through a frame. It is a lens for photographers who slow down, pay attention, and make deliberate choices about what they point their camera at. For those photographers, it still holds up. Pentax personality was not only about small primes. The next lens shows the brand doing something much stranger and more ambitious. At number 3, we have the ED Pentax-DA 20-40mm f2.8-4 ED limited DCWR. Most camera companies follow the same zoom formula. You get a wide zoom, a standard zoom, and a telephoto zoom. The ranges are familiar. The apertures are predictable. The designs are optimized for what the majority of photographers ask for. Pentax looked at that formula and then made the 20-40mm f2.8-4 limited, which ignored almost all of it. This was not a lens for photographers who wanted the usual answer. It was a lens for photographers who specifically wanted something else. The range is short by conventional standards. 20-40mm on an APS-C sensor covers roughly a 30-60mm equivalent, which is the kind of walk-around territory most photographers actually spend the majority of their time in. Pentax made that range compact, gave it weather resistance, built it to limited series standards, and created something that did not look or behave like anything else in the market. The aperture opens to f2.8 at the wide end, which is fast enough to be useful in difficult light, though it steps back to f4 by 40mm. That trade-off was the cost of keeping the lens small, and most photographers who bought it considered it worth paying. What this lens really explained about Pentax was the way the brand thought about its audience. These were not photographers who bought gear because a review told them it was the highest-rated option in a category. They were photographers who valued compactness, character, and the experience of using a system that felt considered rather than assembled. The 20-40 limited was a lens that rewarded that kind of thinking. It made no sense to someone who wanted maximum versatility at maximum aperture in a single package. It made complete sense to someone who wanted a premium Pentax kit they could carry all day without feeling like they were hauling equipment. If you find one in good condition, understand its limits before you buy. The range will not cover every situation, but for the situations it was designed for, it remains a genuinely interesting piece of glass. Small, premium, and unusual was one side of Pentax. But when photographers needed reach and difficult weather confidence, the system had another side entirely. If you enjoy lens stories that go beyond what is fashionable and actually explain why classic systems still matter, subscribe to AltBuzz Lenses. There is more to come. At number 2, we have the SMC Pentax-DA Star 60-250mm f4 ED SDM. At some point in the conversation about Pentax, the tone needs to shift. Because Pentax was not only about compact primes and deliberate walk-around zooms. There was a more serious side to the system, built for photographers who worked outside in difficult conditions and needed glass that could handle what the day threw at it. The SMC Pentax-DA Star 60-250mm f4 was that lens. Substantial, weather-conscious, and built with the kind of intention that made it a genuine working tool rather than a collector's piece. The focal range gave Pentax shooters something meaningful. On an APS-C sensor, 60-250mm covers a wide span of telephoto territory, long enough for wildlife, outdoor portraits, field sports, stage work, and the kind of compressed landscape shots where distance becomes part of the composition. This was not a lens you bought because it looked impressive on a shelf. You bought it because you needed reach on a day when the subject was not going to come closer to accommodate your focal length. It was built into the DA Star line, which meant it came with the weather resistance and construction standards that Pentax reserved for its most serious optical work. For Pentax shooters who spent more time outside than online, this was serious glass. That is not a throwaway line. There is a particular kind of photographer who does not spend much time on forums debating specifications. They are out before dawn, waiting for light, working in conditions that most gear reviewers would describe as challenging. The 60-250 was built with that photographer in mind. The limitation that needs to be stated honestly is that the autofocus system reflects its era. This is not a modern mirrorless tracking engine. It will not lock onto a fast-moving subject with the speed or consistency of current native mirrorless lenses. Used copies can vary in autofocus condition, and the lens is heavy enough that its size becomes a factor on longer shooting days. But for the work it was designed to do, and for the system it belonged to, it represented Pentax at its most outdoors serious. And yet even this was not the lens that made a Pentax DSLR kit feel complete. Number 1 was the zoom that gave many Pentax shooters real professional confidence. At number 1, we have the SMC Pentax-DA Star 50 to 135mm f2.8 ED SDM. There is a moment in building a camera system when something shifts, when you stop wondering whether your gear is serious enough and start trusting it completely. For a significant number of Pentax DSLR shooters, the SMC Pentax-DA Star 50 to 135mm f2.8 was the lens that created that moment. Not because it was exotic or rare, because it was exactly what it needed to be. A fast, capable, well-built telephoto zoom that made a K5 or a K3 feel like a genuine working camera rather than an enthusiast choice. On an APS-C sensor, 50 to 135mm at a constant f2.8 covers the range that working photographers return to again and again. Portraits where the background separates beautifully from a subject. Events where the light is low and the distance is unpredictable. Stage work where you need reach without sacrificing the ability to shoot in difficult conditions. Action where a fast aperture is not a luxury but a requirement. This lens handled all of those situations and did it within a system that many photographers had already committed to for its handling, its weather resistance, and its compact body options. It was the piece of the kit that made everything else feel justified. What the DA Star 50 to 135mm really represented was a statement. Pentax users did not need to move to Canon or Nikon to own a professional-grade telephoto zoom. They could build a complete, serious kit within K-mount, and this lens was the proof. That is why it appears here at number 1, and that is why the title of this video ends with the words, "It still feels professional." Because it does. The autofocus system is from an earlier DSLR era, and buyers looking at used copies need to test carefully. There is no in-lens image stabilization, and the tracking performance will not match what a current mirrorless system can deliver. Those are honest limitations. But the optical character, the build quality, and the role this lens was built to serve, none of that has disappeared. The market became mirrorless first, but the fact that this lens still feels serious explains exactly why Pentax users remained loyal for as long as they did. Which Pentax DSLR lens do you think the market overlooked too soon? And if you still shoot Pentax, what is the one lens you refuse to sell? Leave it in the comments. The real ones always know. Pentax DSLR lenses did not stop making serious photographs when mirrorless took over the conversation. They simply became easier to overlook than they deserved. The industry moved on. The lenses stayed exactly what they were, and sometimes that is enough. Subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses for the glass the market forgot and the stories worth telling.